Hi everyone, welcome back. It's Andrea with Hippie Art Studio. Today I have a painting project using Pebeo paint on some wood panels that I prepped with gesso and modeling paste using a doily as a stencil. I applied some red Vitrail paint, mixed media Pebeo paint, by dripping it onto the panel there with a popsicle stick that I had used to stir the paint up. And then I'm using the palette knife to scrape it across the panel because of the heavy texture. The vitriol paint won't really run because it's really heavy textured. I had some fun with that. So I used the palette knife throughout this project to kind of spread around the paint. And I'm adding it to the right side there. Excuse me. And I can get a little bit of dripping, but not a whole awful lot, so that's why I'm using the palette knife. After my last couple attempts using these paints on paper, which didn't work out too well for me, I really wanted to try them on the wood panels, but I also wanted to have some texture already on there so that it would just continue to build up texture. Now I'm using the yellow Vitrail Pebeo paint, and I'm doing a mixture of dribbling it on with the popsicle stick as well as pouring it, because I learned after my first couple experiments that A, you had to stir the paint up to get it to work properly, and B, that pouring it gave you a really thick coverage, which allowed the effects to work out better. So I don't really have any plan as I'm working on this piece other than to continue to experiment and play and see how the paints are going to react to different things. They react differently depending on how you layer them over each other, as well as how you layer them over other things and the other Pebeo paints. So here I have pulled out the yellow Pebeo Fantasy Prism paint, and you can already see some of the effects that paint gives after just a couple minutes, where it's kind of pooled in the center of the red there. And again, I used a popsicle stick to stir it to get the particles properly mixed up, and then I'm using the popsicle stick to apply drips and drops in the red Vitrail, and also kind of a splattering effect across the panel. So when it's layered on the Vitrail, it'll pool and give it kind of a hammered effect there. And then for the splattered sections, I'm using the palette knife to try and get some coverage on the areas that are still white. So I'm just continuing to kind of spread that paint around the canvas and using the palette knife to create some interesting textures, scraping it through the paint, creating additional lines and grooves. And now I'm going to use the blue Fantasy Moon paint, again stirring it with a popsicle stick and applying it throughout the wood panels. I am viewing these two wood panels as a cohesive piece, so I want some overlap like in the middle and on the edges and stuff like that, so that when they're hung on the wall, they are definitely singular pieces, but they go together. So I'm trying to kind of keep that in mind as I'm building the composition and applying the different colors of paint. That's why I enjoyed doing the splattering, because often it's splattered onto both sides of the panels. And I'm again using that Blue Moon paint to cover up some of the white areas that haven't got paint on them yet, and get some better coverage there. Because these paints seem to react and create cool effects once you already have a base down of one of the paints, I really wanted to make sure that the entire piece was covered with some kind of this Pebeo paint. So here in these last two areas, I decided to pour the blue paint, the Blue Moon paint, so that it would just be easier to get those areas covered. And also the moon paint especially reacts better when it's in a thick, when it's a thicker coverage, excuse me. And again, I'm using the palette knife to spread it and to create some different textured lines and that kind of thing. I'm just going back around the pieces to make sure they all kind of tie into one another. Now I'm adding this black ceramic paint. I'm not really sure what the qualities of this paint are. It really seemed to just be like a nice base coat, but it came in my mixed media discovery kit, and this was the first time I had used it. So I'm just going throughout the two wooden panels and making sure that all the little leftover white spots that you can see where I prepped the canvas are covered with this black ceramic paint. So I'm just, like I said, using the popsicle stick that I used to stir it and kind of dabbing it on in some of the areas that I can still see quite a bit of the gesso and the modeling paste still peeking through the other Pebeo paints. And after I do this step, I'm going to go back through and add some more of the black ceramic paint throughout the panels, just for a little bit of composition cohesion versus a utilitarian purpose. So as I finish that part up, and I'm getting all the white areas covered, I'm trying to think about where I want to go next with this. And now that the wood panels are pretty well covered, I want to start to come back in with the same paints that I used in the beginning and add some more layering across the Prism and Moon paints with the Vitrail. So I'm starting with the yellow Vitrail, and I'm adding that into areas around the black ceramic paint so that it kind of ties in together. It makes it look like the black's just not randomly thrown there. And again, I'm trying to layer it on the Fantasy Moon paint because it'll give it a really interesting effect by doing it that way. And I'm just dabbing it on with the popsicle stick, smearing it in spots, but it got this weird kind of green look to it. I don't know if it was maybe some of the ceramic paint got on my popsicle stick, or if it's because I layered it over the blue. Either way, it started to look kind of weird. So I'm going to add the red, doing exactly the same thing, layering it over the moon paint and applying it with the popsicle stick and just kind of smooshing it on there, scraping it around, trying to get some of it near the black ceramic. And I'm just working throughout the piece so that it is cohesive. And then I'm coming back in with the palette knife to help spread and mix those colors together. After I have the vitrails on the piece in the quantity that I think is good, we're going to move on to the yellow prism again. And for this, I am going to drop it directly into the vitrail paint as well as the black ceramic, because as I said, this is the first time I've used the ceramic, so I'm not quite sure what effect it's going to have with the prism on it. I know what effect it has over the vitrail, which is really cool. And so I'm going to tie the piece further together by adding the prism there. And I'm kind of splattering it across as well, which is another of my methods for tying the pieces together. And then I'm also going to do the same thing with the Fantasy Moon in the blue. And just using those splatters to add some movement, some direction within the piece itself. And you can already see some of those effects coming to life just over the course of the video as it kind of dries and time passes. This paint is so cool to watch work. So now I'm adding the blue, and with the blue I'm adding a couple dots here and there, but mainly I'm splattering it across the page, across the panel for some cohesion. And again, movement within the piece. And that's about it. So I have some close-ups so that you can see some of the effects that these paints can do, as well as the final piece. So here's some close-ups. You can see the hammering effect that the moon has, and also how the prism works there. And just the texture of these pieces is very, very cool. So thanks for watching, and there are some more close-up photos as well as the final piece up next. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and I will see you guys next time. Ta-ta for now.